You know, I didn't actually know what a logical fallacy was until I was like 22. That's a shame. Come to think of it, I didn't know how evolution worked until I was around 22 either. I know a lot of people don't know much about logical fallacies, so let's talk about them. Let's get into it. So what is a logical fallacy? Here's the definition. An error in reasoning that renders an argument invalid. In a broad sense, all logical fallacies are non sequiturs, arguments in which a conclusion doesn't follow logically from what preceded it. Okay, so in a broad sense, a logical fallacy is basically just an error in reasoning. Let me give you some examples. The definition mentions non sequiturs, and points out that a non sequitur is a conclusion that doesn't logically follow from the premises. Here's an example of a non sequitur. The premise is Bob likes eggs. So logically, the conclusion is he must like cheese too. What? What does liking cheese have to do with liking eggs? Nothing. It doesn't logically follow. That one's obvious, but a lot of the time it's a lot less obvious. Sometimes it's hard to spot the logical inconsistency. Here's an example of a non sequitur that's a lot harder to spot. Evolution is false. Therefore, God must have created the earth. A few problems with that argument. First, the premise is incorrect. Evolution is not false. Additionally, even if evolution were false, it has nothing to do with God or whether or not he created the earth. It's a non sequitur. So there's the first logical fallacy I wanted to cover. Here's fallacy number 2, a pretty popular one, the straw man fallacy. Here's the definition. An intentionally misinterpreted proposition that is set up because it's easier to defeat than an opponent's real argument. So the straw man fallacy, as the definition states, is where an opposing side will talk about the other side and set up their position as something that it's not in an effort to easily knock it down. Here's an example. During a political debate, one politician doesn't want to inflate defense spending, and the other politician says how ridiculous it is that politician number 1 wants to leave the country completely undefended. Nobody said he wanted the country to be undefended. That's an easy argument to knock down. And not only that, but this is an integral part of propaganda, twisting and distorting a position in an effort to make the other person seem worse than they really are. However, the key word in the definition is intentionally. Some people might argue with me on this, but in my view, it needs to be intentional to be considered a logical fallacy. If the opposing side just misunderstood their position, it isn't a logical fallacy, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as the definition is concerned. Here's another logical fallacy. It's called the fallacy fallacy. That's where one assumes that a claim is false just because it's poorly argued, or because a logical fallacy was made. It's possible to use a logical fallacy to reach a conclusion, but the conclusion turns out to be correct anyways. That happens, and honestly, it isn't all that rare. So when accusing somebody of a logical fallacy, you need to think hard on whether or not you think they're incorrect. It's possible they're just bad at arguing their point. The next one I wanted to cover is called poisoning the well. Here's the definition. Irrelevant, adverse information about a target is preemptively presented to an audience with the intention of discrediting or ridiculing something that the target person is about to say. Here's a good example. A politician says, "Before you hear my opponent's view on marriage, just remember he cheated on his wife." That honestly has nothing to do with his views on marriage or how they might benefit you. But our brains are programmed in such a way that poisoning the well is actually extremely effective. Here's another, the ad hominem fallacy. This one is similar to poisoning the well in some ways. This one's where somebody will attack their opponent's character instead of their position in the debate. So instead of talking about Trump's energy policy, they'll say Trump's an idiot. Nothing he has to say could be valuable. While that might be true, it has nothing to do with his energy policy. The two things should be examined independently of each other. Next, we've got the circular argument fallacy. This one's super interesting to me because in theory, this argument is usually logically sound. I try to steer clear of religion on this channel, but I'm gonna have to dip my toes in, even if only for a minute. Here's the best example of circular reasoning that I've seen. The Bible is the Word of God, because the Bible tells us so, and the Bible's infallible. It's infallible because it's the Word of God. We know that because it tells us this, and it's infallible because it's the Word of God. It just goes in circles, but if each of those premises were true independently, then it would be airtight. The problem is that they're basing the premises off of the conclusion. Also, the issue lies in premise 1. The Bible is the Word of God. I don't buy that bit, but who knows, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, next fallacy. This one's called the slippery slope fallacy. You hear this a lot in politics. Here's the definition. A consequentialist logical device in which a party asserts that a relatively small first step leads to a chain of related events culminating in some significant effect. Here's an example, and this isn't actually my example, it's from logicallyfallacious.com. I don't know where they got it, maybe they made it up, but it's hilarious, so I'm stealing it. Here's the example they give. If you accept that the story of Adam and Eve was figurative, then you'll do the same for most of the Old Testament stories of similar literary styles. Once you're there, the New Testament and the story of Jesus doesn't make sense, which will lead you to believe that the resurrection of Jesus was a spiritual one. Once you accept that, you won't be a Christian anymore. You'll be a dirty atheist, and you'll have no morals, and you'll start having sex with animals of a barnyard nature. So you better take the story of Adam and Eve literally, before the phrase, "that chicken looks delicious," takes a whole new meaning. Like I said, I don't know where they got that, and I really don't like getting into religion here, but it's pretty funny. Anyways, those are some logical fallacies. As I mentioned with the fallacy, just because somebody's using a logical fallacy doesn't mean they're wrong about their overarching point. It just means they're arriving at that point in a logically flawed way, and they need to revise their argumentation. Okay, that's all I've got for you. This one's a little shorter. Don't forget to check out my Patreon and my Discord, and check me out on all social media. Thanks for watching, guys.